Hi, and welcome to Narrative Drivetime, a show where we talk to storytellers about storytelling. I'm Craig Colby. I've been a television producer for 30 years, told all kinds of stories in all kinds of medium, and I own a storytelling company called Colby Vision. And that right there is John Liu. He is the TSN reporter in Montreal. He's been doing it for 20 years. He is going to tell us all about it today. John Liu, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Craig. Appreciate the invitation.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. We've known each other a long time. One of my favorite people in the broadcast industry. But interestingly enough, you did not start in the broadcast industry. Where did you start?
Actually, Craig, going back to the late 80s after I graduated from university in Winnipeg with a degree in economics and psychology. I worked in the insurance industry for 6 months and then the banking industry for 10 and a half years. And it was probably about halfway through my banking career that I was feeling there I am, fresh-faced and young, and at that time thinking that I had a future in the industry. But about halfway through, I decided that it wasn't really what I wanted to do in the long term. I wanted to do something that was more creatively fulfilling because I had always been interested in English and language arts in high school. And so I decided to quit the bank. I was also inspired by some community theater that I had done in Red Lake, Ontario, and Thompson, which is northern Manitoba, and just to pass the time in small communities, and had a lot of fun being on stage and making a fool of myself. And so I was trying to figure out how can I blend a straight job with performance aspects, and thought that's okay. Well, to me, television news reporting seemed like a good avenue for that, and so I decided to quit the bank, go back to school, and applied for the creative communications program at Red River College in Winnipeg, my hometown. And it was actually a fairly rigorous process to try to not just apply, but jump through the hoops to get to be admitted to the college. And when I finally did, it was very gratifying. Although throughout the entire process, it was the hardest part for me was trying to get up the courage and then convince my dad that this was a good idea, that I was going to leave a stable profession in banking to pursue a dream, really. And it was a little bit of a hard sell at first, but he came around to my decision when he saw how hard I was working at it and how motivated I was to go on a different career path. And that's my dad with my two dogs that my wife and I had. Unfortunately, 3 out of the 4 guys in that photo are no longer with us. But what I had after I managed to make the transition out of banking and into school, and then to TSN, my dad and I really built up a relationship to the point where he was very supportive of what I was doing once I got into my new profession, where I really haven't looked back.
Well, parents always want the best for us, so it's hard to know what the best is at first all the time. But I'm glad that he came around and supported you. Now, getting into your job, I mean, I've told you this before, you almost don't have a real job. You have like a movie job. Like in the job that you have, sports reporter in a big metropolitan town, you should be in some sort of on again, off again relationship with Julia Roberts or something like that. So, you were in banking for 11 years and transitioned to this through school. That's a big jump. What did you do to get yourself in that position to get that job, particularly while you were still at school?
Yeah, well, this is the advice that I give to students, Craig, when they do ask me, or when I go speak to classes, especially in the broadcast of journalism side, and that is to work for free as much as possible. And that means drumming up internships in addition to work placements that are generally part of the curriculum within journalism programs. And so in between my first and second years, I did just that. I arranged internships with through the college or on my own initiative with CBC Sports, being an intern at the baseball venue for the 1999 Pan Am Games in Winnipeg. And then I did short stints at the CTV Winnipeg newsroom and the CBC Winnipeg newsroom as well. And so interning is such a great breeding ground for students to try to introduce themselves to prospective employers, to show them your work ethic, how you interact with team members, and really, it's like an extended audition, really. And so out of that, opportunities in my second year uh, flowed from the acquaintances that I had made in the industry over the previous summer, and uh, over Christmas, leading into Y2K. CTV Winnipeg actually hired me to do part-time news reporting for about 2 weeks during my Christmas break. And as it turns out, it was an audition. Although I didn't really see it as such, the news director wanted to see what I was capable of, and so they gave me a 2 week paid stint, which was gold for a student. And at the conclusion of that internship, if we want to call it that, uh, the news director interviewed me, hired me to do part-time news reporting on the weekends while I was still going to school during the weekdays. But prior to that, I had applied for an internship with TSN back in the fall of 1999, and it's for the entry level positions. That you're very familiar with from your days at TSN, Craig,
Well,
working
that was
on
my first
the
job.
right. Oh yeah, as we called it, the row. The backs of people's heads that you see watching television behind the anchors' desks and desk in the newsroom, taking in news conferences and feeds, highlight packs, doing highlight packs, and so I got the part-time job at CKY in Winnipeg, but they knew I had been awarded the internship at TSN, so they said, go have a great experience, go to Toronto and learn everything you can. Although I found out after the fact that my bosses there said that he's not coming back, which was a huge compliment because I never intended to apply for a job at TSN. I was quite happy having launched a burgeoning career as a news reporter, which is what I had intended all along. And that's an important part of the story, that I had targeted news because as much as I loved sports growing up as a fan, as a participant, I always felt that there were more opportunities in the news side. And so sports was kind of like a secondary pipe dream for me. But the road has a funny way of opening up twists and turns before you. And when I went to TSN in February of 2000 to do my internship, I was there for 3 weeks, had, just as I anticipated, a fantastic experience working in the national newsroom, working with guys that I had grown up watching. I still remember the thrill of waiting to go in on my first day, and Jim Van Horn walked past me, and it was like, wow, that's Jim Van Horn. I mean, I sort of grew up in my
He's gonna love hearing that.
it's, well, you know what? We're all still sort of starstruck when, in certain circumstances, and certainly Jim Van Horn was my supper hour guy that I grew up in my late teen years, my early adult years watching TSN, and so it was just an amazing experience. That I learned so much from in a short time. But at the conclusion of my internship, I had brought a demo tape with me, samples of college projects, but also work or news reports that I had done with CKY. And I left it with the recruiting officer, or excuse me, with our coordinating producer on my last day, more for the sake of just keeping in touch. That, hey, if something down the road opens up, let's talk then when I have some more experience. And this fellow passed it on to our recruiting officer, who watched the tape. He liked it, went up to the vice president of programming, Keith Pelly, and he said, Keith, you got to watch this. And so Keith watched the tape and really liked it, and said to Jim, as Jim told me the story weeks or months later, they said that Keith's words were, it's like, who is this guy and where do we find him? And Jim said that, well, he's down in the newsroom. He's an intern. And so I got called up to Keith Pelly's office, and we had a brief little chat about career paths and career aspirations. And so he said that, well, I'd like to send you out to do a story, see what you can do. And so it would have been my last day in Toronto before I would have headed back to Winnipeg to continue my program.
So you had one day left in Toronto.
Correct.
One day. And
Yep.
you were, your plan was probably to enjoy the city a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
And because you had shared something with Jim Panousis, it was Jim Panousis, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you shared something with Jim, as people often do. Suddenly your last day in Toronto is you're going to go and do a story, a mock story for TSN, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, down to the Air Canada Centre, what it was called at that time, to
Mhm.
do a story on the Raptors shoot around. So I was in the scrums with Vince Carter and Butch Carter and I believe Tracy McGrady, Teresa Cruz, who was the reporter who was leaving TSN at that time. She was the reporter on duty, and so she was there to help sort of guide me and show me where to go, where to stand, and so forth. Because I have very minimal experience as an actual field reporter, and
And it should be said here, I mean, Teresa is a wonderful person.
oh yeah.
And we had a lot of great people at TSN, but you couldn't have run into anybody better to help you out. I mean, for my last 2 years at TSN, when I was producing Sports Desk, my Saturday night dates were Gino and Teresa.
Uh,
So you really did fall in with somebody who was very nurturing and helpful and would want you to succeed.
Absolutely, she was all those things,
Mhm.
and so we basically finished up the mock story. I went back to the studio to cut the story in an editing suite, and the coordinating producer came to me at that point. He says, "When you're done your story, we're going to have you sit on the desk with Jim Van Horn, and you're going to do a little conversation about golf, which was one of my favorite sports." And so. After finishing the story, I go and I sit there with Jim, and we're having a conversation about Tiger Woods, actually. And
Good
because
place
he
to start
was,
when you're talking about golf.
oh, well, Tiger was in full flight in
Yeah.
2000, at the absolute pinnacle of his career. And so it was it was an easy subject to talk about for sure. And they gave me an earpiece. And so they said, okay, stay there for a second. When just don't go anywhere. We're going to have you do a read to teleprompter, a highlight pack.
And
Uh,
had you done anything like that before?
no, that's the thing. So my college, our television equipment was essentially like museum pieces, like from
Yeah.
the golden age of television, like
Mm.
studio cameras that look more like steam liners and no
Yes.
prompters on the cameras. And so I was completely flying blind, deaf and dumb, and I was so nervous, Craig. I thought my heart was going to explode out of my chest, and I just bombed the read. I don't even remember what the pack was about. And then they said, "Okay, now we'd like you to do a 30-second ad lib to camera." And I kind of froze. I was like, "30 seconds about what?" And they said, "Well, anything, like just whatever." And again, I can't remember what I talked about because I was so totally unprepared for it. It was something that we'd had done maybe once or twice in our television class at my college, because at that time we concentrated more on print journalism, not as much on the electronic side. And so I fumbled through that. And again, if I could have been any more nervous, I don't think it was possible. And so I basically, they said, "All right, well, just go and sit in the newsroom. You're done, and we'll come and talk to you shortly." And so I'm sitting there, and all my colleagues from the 3 weeks of my internship are walking around. They see me in a sports jacket and stuff because I brought more professional wear as opposed to t-shirts and jeans for
Mhm.
my internship. And so I actually had on-air wear, fortunately, for the this test, which again was an audition that I wasn't thinking of it as such. But
I mean, you dressing well has always been one of your things.
thanks.
It
Yeah.
has been, yeah,
It's just a thing, yeah, going back to my banking days, right?
right.
But yeah, so I was sat there for a little bit, and then the coordinating producer came to get me and said that Keith Pelly would like to talk to you. And so I went back up to Keith's office, and he said that he asked me like, how did it go? And I said, "Oh, Keith, I was so nervous, I couldn't believe it." And he said, "Yeah, I could tell." And that's when I found out that he was in the control room watching the whole time. And I was like, "Oh man, I'm glad I didn't know that, because I would have completely frozen and been paralyzed if I known he was there." And I said, "Well, yeah." It's like, "You saw it." And he says, "Yeah, yeah, no, I totally understand. You know what? You're really green, but you got a lot of potential. You got a lot of skills. But the only way to get past that greenness is to do hundreds of stories." And from the way that he was talking, I thought he was giving me the old "thanks for coming out, let's keep in touch" conversation. But then he went on this tangent and said, "Well, but I consider myself a pretty good judge of character. So I'd like to ask you, how would you like to move to Toronto and come work for us?" And Craig, of all the reactions that could have come from me organically, laughing in Keith's face would not have been on the list. But that's what happened, because he just completely blew me out of the water with this job offer that was so completely unexpected. And I mean, honestly, through the whole process, whether it was with CKY, the TSN. I really didn't think that they were actually thinking about hiring me because I was a green student. I had no experience, or very little experience when I came to TSN. But again, like the people, especially Keith, I have a debt of gratitude to him that I can never repay because he changed my life. He gave me an opportunity that's has put me down a path for the last 20 plus years that I have no intention of leaving. And it's been so fulfilling and so interesting and unexpected and challenging and all those things. And so, yeah, basically he gave me the job offer in that moment. And uh, I went back to Winnipeg. My friends and colleagues, my classmates, the teachers, they all got the news and they were all thrilled. And then a few weeks later, I was on a one-way ticket to Toronto, actually booked by my future wife, who worked in the travel department at TSN. My friend, my girlfriend, once shortly after I moved to Toronto and joined TSN, Caroline.
Yes, I think I know the person who introduced you to.
Yes, we played together with you on this NetStar and then the TSN softball team, mixed slow pitch team. But she booked the one-way ticket for me to move to Toronto, and I think it was Keith that went to her and said, "Yeah, book this ticket for this fellow John Liu. He's moving to Toronto." And she says, "One way," and Keith's words were, "Hopefully." Yeah, that was our wedding in August of 2007. You were there, Craig, and yeah, we've been married for almost 13 years now. Been together for almost 20, and yeah, so she's been with me basically through the entire run. Putting up with me being on the road and working a lot of late nights, weekends. It's been quite a ride, but she's been very supportive of me the entire way.
So a lot of things came together there. You talk about life changing, and I don't know if people realize that what happened to you, it just doesn't happen. This is like you talk about a movie job. That's like a movie scene. These things don't happen all the time. They rarely happen. I've never heard that story from anyone else. But I will say about Keith Pelly, Keith is the kind of person who takes chances. They don't always work out, but if you take chances, they're not always going to. But he was somebody who could spot talent and would take chances on people and ideas. And obviously, he was absolutely right about you. And talk about life changing. Not only did he change your career, but he brought you to a place where you met your wife and your whole life changed.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and that's why I say, Craig, that I can never repay Keith for having for taking that chance on somebody, an absolute raw rookie, and believing in me, and really all the people at TSN, that all the producers, the executive producers, all the decision makers, my cameramen in Toronto, who were really my mentors. Um, Everybody.
You always learn. You always learn from the people you're with, and you learn more in the first year than you ever do in school. If you're lucky to get it. So let's talk a little bit about the job you do. You are the TSN Montreal reporter. You've been doing that for 15 years. Is that about right?
Coming up on 13 years now.
13 years. What's a normal day like for you?
Well, let's say a normal day in the hockey season, Craig, because I mean that's what occupies the majority of my time. That game day, for instance, I start my mornings researching the issues and the current events for both teams of that day. Go to the morning skate, do up my story, whether it's going to be on SportsCenter or just the internet, and then prepare for the broadcast if it happens to be a TSN regional game. And so that's doing a little bit more research and planning for the players that I'm going to interview pre-game, and then potentially through the course of a game. Obviously, that's dictated by game flow. And then post-game, from having observed, not always, but doing post-game wraps or information segments that have flowed from the game itself. And that's a typical game day. Practices, sort of the same flow, but they're shorter work days. But a lot of what we do is very much rote. It's routine, and what we call ham and eggs in the business, because there aren't always what you would call compelling stories or the types of things that like a lightning bolt strikes you that this is just a fantastic story. So the challenge is always to find an angle, a hook that's going to appeal not just to the Montreal Canadiens fan base, which is my most immediate market, but it has to be on a broader scale. Like if it's going to be on SportsCenter, it has to resonate or has the potential to resonate with a national audience. And so that's the biggest challenge, is that making people outside the Montreal market really care that they're going to want to watch and listen.
So on
But
your ham and egg days, what are you looking for in what would make a good story? We'll talk about what makes a great story later. But on
right.
your ham and egg days, what are you looking for to make up a good story to be used either for a feature or a hit?
Yeah, if there's an overriding storyline, like depending on the opponent, like if it's a natural rivalry or a particular opponent who, a superstar, somebody that's had a great history against the Canadians, then that's kind of a natural fit.
If Sidney
Sometimes,
Crosby's coming to town, you're looking there.
right. Yeah, returning ex-players or Alexander Ovechkin, Boston Bruins, Toronto Maple Leafs, those are always naturals because of the obvious storylines, and sometimes we have to stick to the obvious. Other times, like you mentioned, a feature, I might focus on a specific individual on the Canadiens roster, especially if it has to do with somebody that's come off an injury or um, has a particularly strong history against the opponent that they're facing for that night. Just an angle that you can build up into something that has multiple prongs to it that can tell a little bit of a fuller story about an individual or an angle or an incident or history. Yeah, those types of stories are. Uh, they tend to be a little bit more on the again in the ham and eggs category, or the uh, I guess you have to work a little bit harder to try to do good interviews that will draw out clips or information or cobble together information that'll drive the story, so it's a little bit more compelling for the viewer.
Now, one thing that you keep coming back to when we talk about when you've talked about this is people. There's been less about deep dives into stats and things like that. You have talked a lot about the player, what player is coming into town, what player has changed, what player is coming back. How important is having a person at the center of your story?
Oh, Craig, that's to me personally, that's probably between 75 to 100%, because obviously there are some sports angles, some hockey angles, team angles that you can't ignore in most cases. But when I have the opportunity to tell a story about the human side of a subject, and generally those occur as special projects beyond the day to day. Sometimes they occur on practice days, but more often than not, they're the types of things that I have the opportunity to bring to light something that is important to an individual, or something that he's overcome, or something that's important to him, um, then that's really the type of story that I get the most satisfaction from telling, because it allows viewers to connect to the individual. Because quite frankly, most of the public, they only know players on one level, and that is as performers, right? If you want to call them performers, because basically
They are.
professional sports is entertainment. But as professional athletes, it's a very limited exposure and perception that people are privy to. And quite honestly, a lot of fans really want to know their heroes better, a little on a deeper level. And so to me, the opportunity to tell something about individuals, whether it's humorous or personal or poignant or gut wrenching, these are the types of stories, the types of angles that I really love to sink my teeth into, because it is about people. And for me, the profession is totally about people. Yes, it's about teams. It's about are the professional connections that I can make to individuals, players, coaches, general managers, as people.
Now, when I left TSN to go into, I went to Discovery Channel after 6 years at TSN. One of the things I liked best about going from sports to science is in sports, it seemed like there were a few stories and it was hard to get access to the principles. In science, they were dying to, there were so many stories, they were dying to tell them. And you could really get close to the principles in telling those stories. So for you, the biggest job out of all of it, more than following obscure stats, keeping track of what the other stories are, is access to the players. What is the key to you to having good access to the players?
Well, access is very controlled, Craig. There's no bones about it. Like, as my career has progressed, I've seen access get tighter and tighter, especially with the two main teams that I've covered, the Toronto Maple Leafs in Toronto and the Canadiens in Montreal. They're two of the biggest franchises in the sporting world, and especially when it comes to hockey. And so the access is very controlled, just because there are so many demands on the players and general managers. And so you have to have a very good working relationship with people in the media relations positions of those teams, with the organizations in general, but the players themselves, like the trust relationship that you form with everybody in those organizations is so crucial to enable access on that level. And so, I mean, I try to conduct myself in a way that, I mean, not sucking up to the individuals in the organizations or carrying water, but just being balanced. If I'm going to offer editorial, which we are called upon to do more in our positions now than we ever have, then if I'm going to criticize, then I'm going to make sure that I'm fair with that I have statistics and facts to back up points that I'm going to make. So, not just pulling opinions out of my hat and basically being irresponsible with what I'm saying. And that's all part of forming professional relationships with the people that we're stakeholders, as much as there may be some resistance to that on the parts of certain teams and organizations and individuals within those sports. The fact is that the media and all these people we have a symbiotic relationship, and so it's really important that there's mutual respect and professionalism that comes from both sides.
And have you ever heard from any players about things that you've said on air?
In terms of them criticizing me or taking issue,
Yes.
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, plenty of times, yeah, and
How do you handle that?
I thank them for it, because you know what, I'd much rather speak to somebody like men, as opposed to having somebody ticked off at me about something that I've written or said or put in a story, and then they just all of a sudden treat me very frostily or passively aggressively, right? And all of a sudden it's like, well, so and so seems angry with me, is uncooperative, but why? I don't understand. So I'd much rather that somebody comes to me or even gets in my face, which has happened, gets in my face and rants and says, basically, gets throws everything out there. And you know what? I'd much rather have a conversation like that that's upfront and honest, and we hash it out like men, as opposed to having this impasse that this sort of damages a relationship that sometimes might be a misunderstanding. And that's happened to me with coaches, with players, in the various sports, in football, in hockey, in basketball, and every time, I've tried to handle it that way professionally and uh, calmly, coolly, and and I think that in most cases, both parties we've walked away with, I think, uh, elevated regard or respect for each other, because just in our dealings moving forward after those points, I felt like that we respect each other that way, because we've been able to deal with a contentious moment in a professional manner.
Well, what most people want in any business relationship is to be heard. It's one of the three pillars of managing people, and I learned this in business school and in further business administration courses I've taken. they want to be heard. They want to be appreciated. They want new opportunities. Now, obviously, you can't do that with the athletes, but the least you can do is hear them. And once people have been heard, that usually leads to a better relationship.
Oh, ideally so. Yeah. And I mean, sometimes it doesn't go any further. I mean, one incident that I can remember happened in the Pittsburgh Penguins dressing room, right in front of Sidney Crosby's stall, just after a morning skate that I was there in town to cover, probably Canadians Penguins game. And one player came to me about something that I'd written in a column, and he unloaded on me, like in a very confrontational manner. And like fewer than 10 feet from Sidney Crosby, who was still in front of, still in his stall. And so, I mean, I had to talk this guy off the ledge because he clearly wanted a fight. He wanted to come at me with both guns blazing. And so, I had to just stand my ground and um, uh, defend my point, but not dismiss what he was saying. It's like, okay, well, I understand what you're upset about, but this is what I wrote, why I wrote it, and if you want, you can see all my notes. I will send it to you through your media relations person. Just say this, like, you're only seeing one part of what was used in my column within a greater piece that was published on our website. And he walked away from that, no longer wanting to fight, it seems, but I don't think it changed his mind a great deal about what he might have thought about me. But frankly, I don't really care how he felt about me after that. It's like, okay, well, you were mad at me. This is my point. You can take it, you can leave it, but that's it.
Did you ever run into that player again?
No, he's no longer in the league. But yeah, I mean, I only would have had contact or interactions with him on a very sporadic basis.
Right.
But he's no longer in the NHL, and yeah. But that's the one time that I can think of where it's like, okay, well, somebody came at me, and it wasn't going to end in I guess, in a mutually respectful way, probably. But you can only do as much as you can. As if you be as professional as possible, then at the end of the day, it's you hope that you did things the right way, and I feel like I did, but the individual that I was dealing with wasn't going to accept that.
Well, it's a tough spot to be in when your job is to criticize basically, well, not really your colleagues, but kind of your colleagues, the people you're covering. You have to be critical of them. And you're also in another tight spot because TSN not only covers the teams, but they are a rights holder to the teams. So that's a fine tightrope to walk where you have the rights, so you have to be critical, but you can't be too critical. How much does that impact your job?
Oh yeah, well, Craig, I'll take it one step further because with the Leafs and the Canadians, TSN or Bell Media has an ownership stake in both those teams too. So they're more than just the people we cover. We as reporters, they're partners, right? So and broadcast partners, like you mentioned too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very fine line that I tread, especially because I have broadcast responsibilities and there's the ownership stake. And so again, it just puts more of an emphasis and an onus on me to be fair and balanced. That I have to be able to do my job, but because there would be the possibility of individuals within, let's use the Canadians as an example, that could take great umbrage with what I have to say or could say. Again, it's like having one foot in both camps without actually being connected directly or being on the payroll, so to speak, of the team that I cover. It's a very delicate balance right now. And so, just have to stick to good, honest journalistic principles and hope that you don't cross the line one way or the other to be unprofessional in any way.
Well, John, you have a very natural integrity about you.
Thank you.
I know this even from just playing softball with you. You did not like to see people playing without sportsmanship. So you hold yourself to a high standard, and I know that comes through in your reporting, and I'm sure that comes through with the way you deal with players. And I have no doubt that's one of the reasons you're so good at your job. What's your favorite part about the job?
Well, I think in its purest form, Craig, I get paid to watch sports. That's the basis of news or sports reporting. So how much better does that get? There's millions of people, I was going to say guys, but no, millions of people. There are so many fantastic women, skilled, talented, and smart women working in our industry too. There are millions of people who would love to do what I do. And so I have a huge appreciation for what I get to do in its fundamental form, and that's get paid to watch sports. But uh, one of my favorite parts about the job, about the career, is being able to share people's stories, like we talked about earlier, being able to deliver a product that allows somebody, it could be a kid, it could be a teenager, an adult, a sick kid, that I might do a story about somebody that these individuals greatly admire, and for them to be able to connect to those people on a human level, it's such a great feeling, because it isn't just informing, it's entertaining, but it's also moving people. And to me, that's one of the most satisfying aspects of this profession, is that, if you can make somebody feel something genuine, whether it's anger or sadness or admiration or empathy, then that's a great feeling, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We are people. We're all part of one race, and yeah, being able to build those bridges is a very satisfying feeling.
Well, John, I don't know why it looks like that, but there you are in your throwback TSN gear, representing the company well.
Repping.
And I think you nailed it there. The thing that I've loved most about my career is being able to tell stories and meet interesting people and push their stories along. And John, you are one of the people I've been very lucky to have met and spent some time with, and I really enjoy your work. I think you do a fabulous job. You're a great storyteller, and there's nobody I would rather have covering my favorite team, even though you're covering my least favorite hockey team. So
I'm very lucky that I've been able to cover both. There are very few reporters in Canada that can say that they have.
Well, John, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you giving us the lowdown on how you do this job and your crazy, unusual entry into it. And I wish you well in everything you do. And thank you for spending time talking to me.
Oh, Craig, thank you for the opportunity. And I greatly value your friendship and appreciate this opportunity to share with your viewers. Thanks again.
And this has been Narrative Drive Time. Are you a storyteller who wants to tell the story of how you tell stories? Yes? Then I want to hear from you. Drop me a line at craig@colbyvision.net and tell me a little bit about yourself, your career, and some of the particulars of your process. Colby Vision is a storytelling company working in the broadcasting and the business world. Send me an email if you need help with either. Thanks to Tim Vesely for the music, and Kevin Francisco for the graphics, and Dave White for the editing. And thanks to you for watching Narrative Drive Time.